Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, we are back, and we are joined by Mike Parziale. We've had Mike on the show a few times. We're talking about Michael Jackson. He has this Facebook group called Friends of Wade Robeson, and he's been on it before. We're talking about Corey Feldman, and pretty much that's what we're going to be covering tonight. Mike, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great to have you back. Why don't you remind the audience who is Mike Parziale?
Yeah, well, I have a Facebook page called Wade Robson Supporters on Facebook. You can also link to that page through www.mjvictims.com. I kind of just created that so it was an easier link for people to remember. And essentially, the page started, we're going on almost 5 years at this point. And it was to support Wade Robson when he first came out with his allegations. I started it really out of frustration because every time I tried to comment on a section that was supporting the victims of Michael Jackson, I just got, just inundated with, these negative comments and, just awful statements. And I said, there needs to be some sort of forum where people who support who I believe the victims of Michael Jackson can get together and read articles and different things that are pertaining to this case that have the same mindset that these men and women need to be supported, and their real stories need to come forward. And then over the years, it has morphed into really a page that also talks about other high-profile cases, not just involving children, but also involving, both women and men and et cetera. And I really try to, keep on pushing the idea of advocacy and speaking up and doing what you can, with what you have. Not everyone has the time to go out to the streets and hand out pamphlets and flyers and organize events. Sometimes you have to use the tools you have, and I think social media which I'm on, is a very, very powerful platform, and it can reach a lot of people. So that's essentially it. I'm also a CSA survivor, so when I talk about this, a lot of the passion that comes on this page is because I understand what it feels like to go through and have people not believe what you're telling them, even though what you're telling them is the truth. So that's kind of, my story when it comes to this topic.
Yeah, that's interesting because there is this phenomenon where people don't believe, like they want to doubt, and give these folks like the benefit of every doubt, which is so bizarre, especially when you think, we're looking to protect children. We should be giving them the benefit of that. We should be erring on the side of caution,
Well, I very rarely will I ever give any personal information about what happened to me, but I will share a story that it still bothers me to this day. It took me years and years to come forward. It was after I created this page that I began to really feel the effects of, that suppressed information. And I just remember, I had one point I was kind of at a very, very low point in my life when it comes to this topic. I confronted my parents, and my parents were elderly at the time, and I hadn't said anything for years. And partly because I wanted to protect my family and I wanted to protect them from the information. And I remember telling them, and I remember, hearing my mother and my father say, well, Mike, this is something that was probably, you probably, you went to a therapist and they gave you this idea, and that the story that you're telling us really, it can't be real. We would have known about it. We were always there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just remember just being so just like angry at the time, because I was like, I waited all this time. They had already known what had happened, what I'd gone through, a loss of a job, and having some really anxiety issues and all this. And I'm able to come forward, and then just from my own family to have them take the side of the perpetrator was very difficult, because I just knew that the lie in myself had become so strong. The lie of keeping that secret had become so strong that it was too late. They couldn't believe me, because I had done such a good job of not saying anything. And that's what a lot of victims of this type of crime go through. You just spend every day just trying to cover up what has happened to you and try to make everything look good. And, unfortunately, my mom passed away several years ago, and even to that day, we never had a meeting of the minds on that. And the person that actually did the abuse was, in the hospital room, and I had to sort of play along with it just because my mom was going through a very difficult time in her life, and I didn't want to bring that up. But that's what happens, and then that's real life. That's
in a family situation, especially where you got to run into these people, and it must be horrible.
Yeah, it's not easy, and I wanted to add that to let people know that it's not just about this page. There are other reasons as well, and I think it's important. And there's other reasons why I want people to listen and to really look into when someone makes a claim, to really not just to blow it off, just to actually really listen to them.
Hey, you know what? I know we haven't talked about this since the last time we talked, because it just came up. And when you mentioned how people said, hey, you went to a therapist and you had a false memory syndrome, the kind of thing, right? I just interviewed the guy. You're not going to believe this. It's in the members section. The McMartin Preschool. And the first guy who was the geologist that they brought out there to do with his ground-penetrating radar, and he gave a statement saying, well, he couldn't find anything. And everybody always points to this guy and says, yeah, they couldn't find anything. Look, he searched, they couldn't find nothing. I interviewed this guy for the first time in 30 years. No one's ever interviewed him. And he tells me he went back to the scene after they had raised the property and the garage. He was invited back to the McMartin Preschool, and he saw with his own eyes a hand-dug room underneath the garage. It was hand-dug in the sand, and it was a staircase that was hand-dug underneath the property. And that's exclusive. He sent me a letter about it, too. And,
oh, Lord.
Yeah, I know. This is big. I got to get to work on this, because you know what? We can go and order the reports, the building and grading reports from the title the title company, and it'll have that. They'll have a record of that there. So I got to get to do it, but it's in the members section. I'll send it to you.
That's just, again, that case there, especially because they were dealing with such young children, they could easily, sort of manipulate what the children's statements were, and use this idea of, well, they were so young that they really, all these people that were giving these questions to these young children, they were manipulating them, and it's and again, there's more to a story sometimes than just the soundbite, and that story especially.
Yeah. So now, the reason why you're back here today, though, is because Corey Feldman is all over the news. I guess it started with the Harvey Weinstein case, and then Feldman popped back into the news. What can you tell us? What's the latest?
Well, I want to give people kind of the groundwork here. And, first of all, I want to say there was no question, I believe, that Corey Feldman was a victim of child rape, child abuse. There's no question. I don't think he is making these stories up in the sense of what happened to him. However, there are some things that are bothersome. Corey Feldman, at 3 years old, from his own words, said that he was put into the Hollywood business. He's put into commercials and things like that. And according to his own words, there was something he didn't even realize, he couldn't even sort of grasp because he was so young. And as it went on, he began to do more commercials and work like that, and then eventually got into films. Well, we all know Corey Feldman from like the film Stand By Me and things like that. He eventually got to meet up with Corey Haim, and some of the things that people need to realize, and this is in Corey Feldman's book. When Corey Haim was on the set with Corey Feldman on the set of Lost Boys, and Corey Haim was about 14, in the book, Corey Feldman talks about Corey Haim as being a very over-sexualized teenager. That Corey Haim told him a story about how he was on the set of Lucas, and one of an older gentleman talked him into having sex with him, and he was raped in a trailer, and that this was totally normal. And I guess Corey Haim was then presenting this to Corey Feldman and pressuring him to engage in some sexual act. And according to the book, Corey Feldman told Corey Haim, no, this is not what kids do, and and rebuffed those advances. But I guess Corey Haim was persistent enough that he finally said, I know a gay guy. His name is Marty. Why don't you guys get together? Now, Marty Weiss at that point was in his 20s. So Corey Haim finds Marty Weiss, and I guess he's on the set as well. They go into an adjoining room where Corey Feldman is in and engage in sex. Now, Corey Feldman states that this was incredibly disturbing to him and made him nauseated. And then after they were done, Marty Weiss went his way and Corey Haim, went his way. What, again, is bothersome to that story is, okay, I can understand he's a teenager, and I can understand that you're not really thinking fully at that age, but to introduce your best friend, who you have said in your book that you felt something was wrong, you knew it was wrong because you told them, to then introduce that same friend of yours to somebody who's going to then abuse him. Obviously, he knew that a 20-something-year-old with a 14-year-old really wasn't a good thing. To do that in itself is wrong, but it gets even worse. So the years go on, and then Corey Feldman explains that when he was 15, he was also abused by some people, and according to him, these men were kind of like the low-level type people. And later on, he then, now he's in his 30s, in 2004, decides to go to an award show that is hosted by and organized by Marty Weiss. Now, Marty Weiss was a guy that he just wrote in the book. He wrote in the book, so he obviously knew was a predator. He's actually going to an award show that Marty Weiss actually is organizing. And not only does he go to the award show, he actually thanks Marty Weiss. Now, you have to picture this award show. There's tons of child actors there. I'm sure there are parents there. From what I can see and when I saw on the video, because I have a video of this, it's a very thrown together type event. And I read articles that a lot of these child award shows are somewhat of a ruse to get children there, and they're really there to scope out children for abusers. So Corey Feldman, at that point, 2004, he's in his 30s, and he states that he goes to this show and doesn't say anything, doesn't do anything, etc. So now we roll into I want to say it's 2011, and Corey Feldman comes forward, and he talks about how pedophilia is the biggest problem in Hollywood, and it needs to be dealt with. And he goes on some various shows and discusses this. And then he says, decides to write a book. in 2013, Wade Robson makes his first claim. I remember Corey Feldman because of the statement he made about the trying to expose pedophiles in Hollywood. I contact Corey Feldman and ask him for support of Wade Robson. And Corey Feldman's response was that I need to get over it. Michael Jackson is dead. And that if Wade Robson wanted to say something, he should have spoke up sooner. He then goes on to say that Wade Robson, why didn't Wade Robson say anything during the trial? And why did Wade Robson take money and gifts from Michael Jackson? So alluding that this is all for money. So now, again, I'm giving this timeline here. Now, Corey, after the Harvey Weinstein situation, it brings attention back to Corey Feldman. And then Corey Feldman decides to do a crowdsource fundraiser where he's going to create a movie and with this money and help him with lawyers and security and all of this. And he's going to do this years later. Now, when he wrote that book, he also promised before that he was going to be naming names, and that did not happen. Okay, we're now going into 2017, and now he says he's going to make a movie, not a documentary, reminder, a movie, and he needs $10 million to do it. And with that $10 million, he's going to present a movie. The caveat to this is that if Corey Feldman does not raise the $10 million, say he only raises $5 million, he has 2 months to do this, by the way. The money doesn't get given back. Corey Feldman gets to keep that money. So it's not one of these crowdsourced fundraisers where if you don't make your goal, then the money goes back. No, if you don't make the goal, he gets to keep the money. So there's a lot of questions that get brought up when we talk about Corey Feldman, and that's the timeline. But there's definitely other topics I definitely need to cover when it comes to Corey Feldman.
See, the thing is, if he's saying he wants $10 million, there's a lot of ways to do this. Because I've been involved in some of these cases, and there's a lot of ways. One, you could threaten to file a lawsuit, and you could have an exhibit in there, something that would name the people, okay? And we want to settle, right? We don't want to take this to trial. We want to settle so that it doesn't go public. But here's what's going to be in our complaint when we file it. That's one way of doing this. Another way of doing this is say, well, I'm going to do a movie if I don't get $10 million. So he's naming a figure, and we know that they're tossing money around. If you look at the DEN thing, the DEN, the Digital Entertainment Network, $150 million funding that thing, right? So these people, when other people giving out money, blackmail type money. So if he's naming a figure, he'll get that money, not to produce the movie. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's it. And we're going to get on talk about it a little bit later. Some of the interviews he did on the Today Show today, actually, and with Megyn Kelly, and I'm going to kind of talk about that and how that, in many ways, I think ruined his chances of a movie at all. But the other thing that Corey Feldman doesn't seem to want to bring up, and especially when it comes to the Weinstein allegation. Now, Harvey Weinstein was being accused of essentially objectifying women and pressuring women to engage in sex because he's a very powerful figure, and using threats like, well, if you don't do this, I'm not going to give you this role, I'm not going to give you this job, and using his influence and power to basically get what he wants from females. But, like I think we even talked about this before, there's something called Corey's Angels.
Right.
And for those
I got that written down in my notes here right in front of me as you were talking. I put that down here. Go ahead.
Which is the height of hypocrisy. For anyone who wants to see what this is about, all you have to do is go to Google and type in Corey Feldman Celebrity Wife Swap. He was on Celebrity Wife Swap, and it was him and one of his Corey's Angels and another celebrity and their wives, and they swapped lives, sort of thing. And according to what I saw in this show, these women have to sign contracts. They have to behave in a certain way. They have to dress provocatively. He even makes some sort of comment to the wife that he swapped lives with about cleavage and how, if she wants to, be a Corey's angel, she has to get with, play ball. All these things that women are complaining about, Harvey Weinstein, are being done on a smaller level, but in the same way that Corey Feldman is doing with these Corey's angels. And nobody is even talking about it.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know if it's still on the website, but I've seen the application to be a Corey's angel. Anywhere in the country, you send him some pictures. If you want to get into entertainment business, you want to be in media and TV, you want to be a star, you got to go live with Corey Feldman, and dress up for him and do all this stuff with him and his wife. I'm glad you brought that up because that is very disturbing.
It's everyone. What people hear is, and they hear the message. The message, in many ways, is on point. The message is that Corey Feldman saying, I want to expose the pedophile rings and the pedophile problem in Hollywood. That's what they hear. That's the gotcha.
Right.
Okay. But what they don't understand is the messenger is just as important as the message. And I made an analogy about this. I said, what? What if I'm in my kitchen and I'm spending all day and I brew the most perfect pot of coffee you can imagine. It is robust. The flavor is fantastic. It is perfect in every single way. I spent hours and hours and hours on doing this, and I finally got the perfect pot of coffee. I then take that pot of coffee, and I decide to pull out a carafe that's dirty and hasn't been cleaned, and there's hair in it, and there's all this nasty stuff in it. I then take that coffee, and I pour it into that carafe. And then I serve you that coffee. Well, guess what? That coffee is no longer the perfect coffee anymore. And that's the same with the message. That metaphor, the coffee is the message. And when you have somebody like a Corey Feldman who's the craft giving that message, you have now destroyed the message. Because the messenger really shouldn't be the one giving the message. He's not in the position to give the message. There's way too much baggage, and there's way too much inconsistency, and too much problems in his own persona that will destroy the very, very important message that he's trying to give. And that is when I've been tweeting somewhat today and on other days. That's a message I'm trying to give. I'm trying to say, hey, look, I understand the message is important and the message is correct, but the person that's giving it is not the person that should be giving it.
You know what?
He has way too many hypocrisies going on.
I'll give you another example, too, that disturbs me, is Majestic Magnificent. Now, Corey, his last album, he dedicated, I think one was to his father, but he dedicated his album to Majestic Magnificent, who was Michael Jackson's personal magician, magic with a K, by the way, and it's well known that this guy was Michael Jackson's thug, running around threatening people and intimidating people in order to silence them about these child abuse cases. And Corey's friends, close enough friends with this weird guy to begin with. He was a local guy, a local Vegas character. This was a known guy. Okay, so what do you know about this guy, Majestic Magnificent?
Well, like I said, I've done some research on him, and I saw. I mean, the last time he was really on film was a gentleman from Britain did a documentary on Joseph Jackson, and his whole goal, he's kind of doing it tongue in cheek, was to try to get an interview with Joe Jackson. And I remember him meeting up with Majestic Magnificent. And when I saw him on film, I said, oh, there's no way this guy knows Joe Jackson. He looks too much of, too much of a character. He definitely looks shady. There's something about him that just, I'm not believing this. So anyways, to find out, yes, he did know Joe Jackson, and yes, he did set up the interview. And during that interview, Majestic was right there monitoring to make sure that interview did not go off course.
Right.
Because the interview did ask about Michael Jackson and asked if Michael Jackson, was gay, and Joe Jackson hated that. But he also talks about how he had to pay Joe Jackson, I forget how many thousands of dollars, to give this interview, and that, Majestic was kind of the middleman in between getting this money so he could give this interview, which is, it goes to show, the characters that we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
And to have a connection with Corey Feldman, it doesn't surprise me. It's the same idea that he just has so much baggage.
And how can he defends Michael Jackson, Corey. And now, even if nothing happened to him from Michael Jackson, which, even if it was saying, but the thing is, he has to know the whole pattern of behavior with the wine and the Jesus juice and all this stuff. There's way too much there.
Again, when people tell me, well, Corey Feldman, and this was I was listening to a show called Gervie's Law, and Casey Kasem's daughter, I forget her first name, is on that show.
Yeah.
And as a gentleman by the name of Attorney Gervie is his last name. They have a show, they talk about law issues and things like that. And they had Vince Finaldi, who's the lawyer for Wade Robson and James Safechuck, on. And Miss Kasem was discussing how she dated somebody that knew Michael Jackson. Several people that knew Michael Jackson, but she dated somebody, and she knows that Michael Jackson could never do this because her ex-boyfriend told her that this was just not what could happen. And my take on that is that you need to look at Corey Feldman. Okay, when you look at Corey Feldman, what you see is a man that is desperately trying to imitate, look like, dance like, be like, have that same persona that Michael Jackson projected. And there's an obvious reason why. Corey Feldman talks about the fact that he did not have a good childhood, that his parents were not really, there for him, and his father figure wasn't really there for him. And he talks about how his parents took money from all that. You then have a Michael Jackson that steps in, who was probably very good. I don't think, personally, I do not believe that Michael Jackson raped Corey or molested Corey Feldman in any way, and I have reasons for that. But, you have a person who is talking about Michael Jackson in that positive light and really wants to be like him. You can see he idolizes him.
Yeah.
Why would you take that person's word or that person's opinion of a person? They're way too again. The way into that person, their opinion has been skewed. It's been hijacked by the predator, and this happens all the time. And it's the idea that everyone thinks that every predator is going to molest every child. What people don't realize is that does not happen, and sometimes predators will use children for different reasons. One of the reasons is an emotional bond. They want to have an emotional bond to the child. There's no sexual attraction, but they want to have an emotional bond. And with Corey Feldman, because he was a young child actor that felt his childhood was taken away, I'm sure Michael Jackson connected to that and used that. The other factor could have been Corey Feldman was a child actor, and the other reason is he could have been a conduit to find other children and find other child actors. And again, when you're that hyped up and that you're idolizing somebody to that extreme, your objective thinking goes out the window. And that's the problem with Corey Feldman. He can't let go of the fact that, yes, Michael Jackson was good to you, but it doesn't mean he was not a predator to others.
Yeah, but he also had to have seen the behavior, going on. You wanted to talk about the interviews lately that Feldman's doing.
Well, let me go on. I want to go off to. I did a Twitter thing with Gabe Hoffman,
right.
And who, for people who don't know who Gabe Hoffman is, Gabe Hoffman was one of the producers of An Open Secret. and he did it with another man, but I believe his last name is Valentinus. And what I tried to do was, in this Twitter discussion, is I try to alert Gabe Hoffman that, Corey Feldman is not the person you really want to be hanging your hat on. And unfortunately, it didn't go that well. What happened was that Gabe Hoffman ended up really defending Corey Feldman. And, what I said was I tweeted to him at first. I said, Gabe, you need to understand that Corey Feldman is defending victims of Michael Jackson, and that how can you support somebody who's going to, say I'm for exposing pedophilia in Hollywood, but yet I'm not going to touch one of the most obvious cases in Hollywood history of Michael Jackson. And I then brought up the fact that, and I sent him the link to the video of Corey Feldman attending that actors, ceremony where Marty Weiss was there. And his response was, well, it's easy to, do armchair, observations, meaning that it's easy to look at this after the fact. And then, I brought up again, you're missing the point here. You don't understand that Corey Feldman was in his 30s. He essentially called Wade Robson out because he said he didn't come out early enough to with his allegations, and he waited too long. And he's in his 30s in 2004, and he's supporting a child predator. I said, you're not understanding this. You're missing the point here. And then he went off to describe, well, Corey Feldman had his demons, and you have to understand that, this is part of the process. And again, excuse after excuse and excuse, and eventually I was blocked.
Yeah.
But the point I was trying to make was, again, you're getting the mess. You're just looking at the message. You're just saying, oh, this is the message that needs to get out. And Gabe Hoffman understands. He helped to fund the film about this. He understands how predators operate, but he also has to understand that not all victims make good advocates.
Well, you want to know what? You want to know what though? How savvy could these two characters be? They were supposed to come on the show, and just I don't know what happened. Okay, it was a live show too, and they haven't gotten back to me. I haven't apologized, nothing. But how savvy can this guy be if he hires Amy Berg to produce this Open Secret movie to direct it, when she's out there defending the West Memphis 3 killers of 3 little boys? Like
I think Gabe Hoffman was a hedge fund manager.
Yeah, right. He still is.
And Matthew, I think it's Matthew Valentinus.
He's a lawyer.
Yeah, he's a lawyer, and he was into film and all that. And I think they had an idea, and they were supposedly inspired by what Corey Feldman said, but they didn't do, I think, enough of the true follow-through. And I've been doing this for 5 years. Like, I've been researching this for close to 5 years. It's not easy. But I don't think they really dug deep enough to realize that there's so much interconnection here that you have to be careful about who you pick, who you cover. I think the subjects in that movie were excellent. I think the people that they talked about and the victims that came forward were brave, and the movie is very important because it did set a precedent. But I think that they missed the boat in a lot of ways. And I'm going to be honest with you. I sent suggestions off to, I believe it was at the time, Matthew Valentinus, and how he should possibly, because they couldn't find a distributor. I said, just rent out a movie theater. Rent out a movie theater that's right in Los Angeles. Invite every A-list celebrity that was a former child actor to watch this movie. And when nobody shows up, because that's what's going to happen, you now have a story. You now have something that you can put in the news, get that name out there, and get people demanding to see the film. But again, who knows if you even saw that suggestion. Yeah. But the point is that I don't think there was enough done to really, really get people, excited about that movie. It was kind of
again, Amy Berg didn't show up for the red carpet. She didn't promote the film at all. There's another thing too that goes on with all this, and again, if you're naive, like I was when coming into this, although I've been a little naive myself, okay, and what I found is, especially working with the Epstein case, is that a lot of the reporters and the stories and people writing books and stuff like that, that even if they sound like they're on the right side, but they just change things just a little bit. To set things off in the wrong direction and distract you and keep you spinning your wheels in the wrong direction. Like there's a lot of people that are in on it, they're working for them, especially with Epstein too, because I think it was Gawker or something like that. He owned Radar Online or Gawker. He was a big investor in it. So, and I know for a fact too that people have come forward with pictures of and stuff like that, and they get sucked, they get bought off by the National Enquirer and Gawker and Radar Online, stuff like that. But it never makes the public. They get paid, but it never makes it to the public. So they're all in on it, man.
It's one, rabbit hole and then another.
Yeah.
And, I just really feel that people, when they jump into these things, because he's asking for a lot of money. It's $10 million, and there's already raised roughly about $200,000. So there are people giving money to him. They need to do the back research. When we're discussing these things, whether it's a documentary like An Open Secret, whether it's Corey Feldman, they need to do the back research. Like there were people we found out, this actually happened months ago. But, Judy Haynes, who's Corey Haynes' mother.
You know what? Before we get into that, let's take a commercial break before we get into that, okay? Sure. Okay, we're here with Mike Parziale, and we're discussing, the whole situation around Corey Haim and Corey Feldman and the new film and exposing his plan to expose pedophiles and stuff. We'll be back with more of Mike Parziale, who runs the Wade Ropes and support of Wade Ropes and the website on Facebook. And also you can find mjvictims.com. And now a word from our sponsors. Archival Revival, the Christian Film Archive, is currently paying for vintage Christian films. They are dedicated to preserving and restoring classic Christian films and media. So if you have an original prints, negatives, or other film elements of classic Christian films, or you have audio recording masters for classic Christian record albums, they want to buy them from you. So email archival.revival@gmail.com, and they're going to make you an offer. Archival Revival wants to preserve these classic Christian films so that they continue saving people for years. These films have brought people to salvation. They want to continue that. Their staff has decades of experience in handling and preserving of film elements, and they utilize the very best climate-controlled film storage facilities around the world. Contact them today at archival.revival@gmail.com. If there's someone you know has these prints, negatives, recording masters, or other materials from vintage Christian films, you can check out their blog at archivalrevival.blogspot.com. Now, just so you understand, Archival Revival wants to pay you for these films. So you can look in your church attic, in the church basement. If you have a friend who runs a Christian youth ministry or these youth vacation Bible study camps, they have these old films in those big metal containers, 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter. Archival Revival wants to buy them from you. So this is a sponsor that actually wants to give you money. And all you have to do is contact them, tell them what you have. If you're in the UK or Ireland or Africa, these films are all over the world, and they're gathering dust, and they're going to deteriorate if they don't get into the hands of Archival Revival. So that's archival.revival@gmail.com, or the blog spot is archivalrevival.blogspot.com. Don't forget, this show is brought to you by pscoco.com. Phoebe Sod is an independent curator with the Cocoa Exchange. The Cocoa Exchange is formerly known as Dove Chocolate Discoveries, and they make the finest silky smooth chocolate because the products start with the best cocoa beans, which are tested for quality and flavor by expert technicians. The Cocoa Exchange offers not just premium chocolates, but anything from sauces and spices to brownie and cake mixes, and even coffee and martini mixes. If you wish to treat yourself or someone you love to a sweet and tasty gift, then the Cocoa Exchange is the brand for you. So you go to pscocoa.com, you click on the Shop Now button. You can see all their beautiful chocolates. You can order it right now tonight. It could be in your mailbox in a couple of days. Or if you want to get into the chocolate business, you want to be a chocolatier just like Phoebe Sod, you can click the Contact Us button, and you can learn how to get your own website, go into the cocoa chocolate business, and sell chocolate and make a little bit of money there. Remember, all these shows on Awake are brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com and get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. But you also do all the kind of different services for you. An online dating service investigation. It's called an online infidelity investigation. And that's where you give us your husband or your boyfriend, your girlfriend's email address, and we trace it back to their online dating websites, and we return a list of all the dating sites that email is registered to. We can expand on that investigation and trace it back to porn sites, escort service sites, swinger sites, even gambling websites, and even prescription drug websites. If you think your ex-husband or something is addicted to prescription medication or involved in a extreme online pornography addiction, we can produce a report for you that you can use in court. Adoption investigations. If you want to locate your birth parents or your birth child you gave away for adoption, we can do adoption investigations for you. Asset searches for you. Locate bank accounts, hidden assets, hidden properties, hidden income, all different kinds of services in the asset search investigation. Email tracing. If you need to locate or identify somebody from just an email address, we can do an email trace investigation for you, and all kinds of digital forensics, computer and cell phone digital forensics, where we can recover deleted content from an email or a hard drive and produce a report for you that you can use in court. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can contact me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and we're here with Mike Parziale. You can find his website, mjvictims.com. So now, Mike, when we took the break, you were just getting into the whole thing about Corey Haim's mother.
Yeah, well, Judy Haim is not been pleased with Corey Feldman for a while now. She actually said that Corey Haim really didn't like Corey Feldman that much in the later years. And she's even gone as far as saying that she believes that the whole idea of this fundraising thing is basically just a scam, and it's just a way of doing of receiving money, and it's just another way for Corey Haim to use her child's name to garnish more attention. Now, Corey Feldman recently was just on a couple of shows today. He was on the Today Show, and he was on Live with Megyn Kelly, or Megyn Kelly Show. And they were literally back to back. And what I found interesting, and as people watched that interview very closely, they start off with the Today Show. Corey Feldman starts to talk about how he's crowdsourcing for a movie. And Matt Lauer says Corey Feldman is crowdsourcing for a film. He's trying to raise $10 million, and it's crowdsourcing for a documentary. He's trying to raise $10 million. Corey Feldman stopped him immediately and said, "No, wait. It's not a documentary. It's a film. There's going to be actors, and there's going to be special effects, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." Now, that caught my interest for a little bit. I'm like, okay, so you're going to do something this serious, and you're going to make it a film, okay? And he went on further saying it's going to be about his life in Hollywood, and it's going to be incredibly truthful. So again, it's not about and this is again my opinion, it's not about exposing pedophilia in Hollywood. It's about telling your story and having you direct it and have you put your perception out there. And then he went on further because Matt Lauer actually, he didn't just let this, the state lying down. He said, well, Corey, he goes, you got to understand, you're now, basically you raised a little less than $200,000. It's going to take a long time to raise $10 million. And every day that you don't come forward with this information, it's going to mean that there's more victims. And he also stated that Corey Feldman was going on about how the movie was going to be talked, how it was going to sort of be set in place and things like that. He says, well, are you going to be naming names? And Corey Feldman didn't say yes to that question at that point. He said, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present my story and tell my story in the best way I can to try to expose people. And Matt Lauer didn't back down. He says, we've been down this road before. Are you going to name names? And Corey Feldman, again, would not really answer that question. He, again, backed down. And it wasn't until the very end of the interview that he knew, Corey Feldman knew that this interview wasn't going good because it looked like he was just looking to try to fund a movie that was just going to showcase him, or just trying to get some money from crowdsourcing. So he finally said, well, you know what, all the names will come out. All the names will come out. But then it goes further because then he was interviewed by Megyn Kelly. And Megyn Kelly, I think, was smart enough to probably watch the interview that Matt Lauer just did. She goes on and still presses him on the names. Who, are you going to name names? And Corey Feldman, in both interviews, talked about how he did name names in 1993. The Santa Barbara police came to me. They were looking for dirt on Michael Jackson. I told them that, he's not that guy. I know what a pedophile is, and Michael Jackson's not that guy because I was molested. Here are names. And he said he told the Santa Barbara police, and the Santa Barbara police told him that, well, we'd like to help you, but we're not in that jurisdiction. You need to go to that jurisdiction. And Megyn Kelly pressed him on, well, why didn't you go to that jurisdiction? And he says, well, at 18, 19 years old, I barely got out the words that what happened to me. I didn't know. I wasn't going to go to a different jurisdiction. I was 19. And then when the statute of limitations is only 10 years, I gave the information during the statute of limitations, and it would have ran out when I was 22. But what 22-year-old, is going to, reveal that information? This is exactly the criticism he waged against Wade Robson when Wade Robson was in his early 20s and was put on the stand and wasn't ready to talk about Michael Jackson. The exact same criticism they was waging about himself, he was waging against Wade Robson. But then Megyn Kelly finally pushes him about the names. Well, I'm going to name the names, and he goes, but she goes, okay, so you're going to name, how many people were there? There were 6. Okay, how many people are still in the industry? Well, yeah, about 3. Okay, well, he already told you about one. It's in the book, Marty Weiss, which is no big deal because at that time he was convicted. He then goes on, and she goes, well, what about the second accuser? Are you going to, what about Corey Haim's accuser? Are you going to name him? He goes, well, I can only speak for what happened to me. I can't speak for, what happened to Corey Haim because that's what he told me. I wasn't a party to that. And I think he said that because of what Judy Haim was doing. Judy Haim was saying, leave my son's name out of this, and I can't blame her. I wouldn't want Corey Feldman to be the steward of my son's reputation either. So she then pressed him again, and he then went on and said, well, they're all low-level people, and, one guy is actually working for the L.A. Dodgers. He was working for the L.A. Dodgers doing something. So Megyn Kelly says, okay, he also talked about how this guy owned it was like a soda shop where all the local child actors hung out. He also mentioned that, too. She goes, well, you gave us the fact that he owned a soda shop. You gave us the fact that he works for the L.A. Dodgers. You know everyone's now going to be putting those two things together. Why don't you just name the name now? And he goes, you know I can't do that. You know I can't. I don't have a lawyer. And then she talks about, well, you can get a pro bono lawyer. You can,
I can get him a lawyer. I can get him a lawyer tomorrow who would take this case. But let me tell you something else, though. If there were police reports, if he gave a statement and named these names back in '93 in the Michael Jackson case, those statements would have to have been turned over in discovery to the defense, so as exculpatory evidence. So there's, you know what I'm saying? So if there's a statement, they exist someplace and they can be obtained.
And they were obtained by several news outlets. They were obtained by several news, but they didn't put them out. And I'm sure there's probably a Freedom of Information Act. There has to be a way of getting.
Oh yeah, you can get those.
But it's what's weird. What bothers me is now he's just gone on and said the main person that he was talking about, that was Corey Haim's abuse. He was the guy that's supposed to be the big wig, the big executive, the real A-list person. He's not going to name that name because it was Corey Haim who got abused by that gentleman. It's these lower level people that in this documentary that he'll name those names, and it's like, okay, you just now dismantled the whole purpose of your movie. Who's going to care at this point about your movie when you're only going to be naming these low-level people that nobody knows about? And at this point, because they're so low-level, why don't you say them anyways? They're not high-level people. You have the low-level people, I'm sure that no executive is going to want to defend. They're going to stay clear of them. So he just literally destroyed the whole purpose for his documentary in 2 interviews. And this is why I keep on saying the messenger is so important when you're giving this type of message. And it was just bizarre to watch. The interview was cringeworthy.
Because you know why? Because he's self-destructive. The guy is so self-destructive. And every piece of artwork he puts out there, this band, everything he does is just so slipshod and sloppy. This tour, it just fell apart. Right before his eyes, he's getting busted for pot. Who gets busted for pot in 2017? Is that even possible anywhere? Where do you got to go to get arrested for pot?
Well, his claims is that was a shakedown.
Yeah.
And then his claim was very shortly after he was crossing a highway with a group of people, and they
right.
They were basically got run down by 2 trucks, I guess. Trying to get run down by. First of all, why are you crossing a highway with a group of people? And second of all, it just seems so fabricated. It just seems so convenient.
This Dodger guy and the soda fountain guy is going to rent 2 trucks to run him over. Listen, we're running out of time.
I don't think that's going to be. I don't think that's going to happen.
It was a soda truck.
Again,
it was a soda truck.
Yes. Well, the problem is that it makes a mockery of what is there, and I don't. Again, do I know Corey Feldman? Do I think his heart is in the right place? It possibly could be. Maybe in many ways he does have a connection to this, and he does want to expose it. But the problem is he's not in a position, I think, just psychologically, just in a good place to do this. I mean, and the other point I have to keep on bringing up is that if you're going to be an advocate, you can't pick and choose who you're going to advocate for, especially when one of those people has been accused 7 times of inappropriate behavior with children, has 2 settlements, has now 2 pending cases, has a pattern of behavior that is beyond the charts. You can't get legitimacy when you do that. And this sort of the other thing I wanted to mention is when I talk about Michael Jackson and Corey Feldman being alike, that was also Michael Jackson's persona. Always the victim, can never take responsibility for their own action. Always somebody's out to get them. There's the bad guy. You call Judy Haim a bad person because she came forward about talking about Corey Feldman, calling him a scan artist. Always having, being the person that's being hunted down and someone's out to get them. That is the same persona that Michael Jackson had for so many years. And you're just seeing it through a different person. It's Corey Feldman now. And when I saw these interviews, of course, you have everyone out there, a lot of people, hashtag, I stand with Corey, hashtag. And you try to give this information out to them, and it's just like, blind. It's just blinders on. Well, he has a right to defend Michael Jackson. He has a right to do this. Yes, he has a right to do a lot of things, but now that he's acting as an advocate and he wants to stop pedophilia in Hollywood, he needs to start rethinking what his role is, and he hasn't done that. It's actually, like I said, incredibly aggravating to be on this side of it.
Well, okay. Well, we're out of time, though. Is there something you want to leave us with before we have to go?
Sure. I just want people to, again, when you're, giving money to somebody, when you're actually supporting a cause, really do the research and really make sure that the cause is really what it is. Because, sometimes a person's message might be on target, but the way they're doing it isn't. And, that's really what I want to leave people with. And, hopefully it gets out to enough people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, especially considering they give this guy $200,000 to do a movie when the kind of work that you and me are doing over here, week in, week out, scratching the nickels together. Mike Parziale, thank you so much, my friend.
You're welcome. You have a good night.
Good night. Okay, they had Mike Parziale, and you could find his website is mjvictims.com, and he really is doing some good work out there, okay? And we were talking off the air, too, about this whole thing with Kevin Spacey out there today, and all the thing that was in the news today. Because Kevin Spacey just pretty much admitted that when he was drunk one night, he was molesting a 14-year-old little boy. And you can't forget that Kevin Spacey is on the Epstein flight logs. He was on a flight, Epstein's plane, with Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender, Bill Clinton, Chris Tucker, and Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, and Bill Clinton. Yeah, I guess that's it, right? And you can't forget also too that Chris Tucker was involved in the Michael Jackson case too. He's the one that was he has his own private plane, and he was flying around the Michael Jackson victims too, the Arvizo family. So it's a small world. People keep popping up, names keep popping up all over the place. Anyway, we're out of time. But really, it is so true that with hey, you got this Corey Feldman, everybody, and their heart's in the right place, sending them all this money. But if we just had 10% of that kind of money, what we could be doing here? If we just had $20,000, or one thing you could do is if you go to OppermanReport.com, there's a donate button. And you can just donate $5 a month, or $10 a month. And if we just had 1,000 people do that, 2,000 people, you have no idea the kind of work we could be getting done here. And if I could just hop on a plane and fly to where things are going on, meet people in person, talk to people, film them, and this thing with Corey Feldman, I know how to handle this. If Corey Feldman's out there and you want to get a hold of me, I'll get you the security, I'll get you the lawyer. I know how to do this stuff. And we can get this exposed. This is not a big deal. All right, guys, thank you so much. If you join the member section, OppermanReport.com. I'm trying to raise funds this week because we're still paying. I don't know. I gave the impression that the bills were over, okay, on the last Friday night show. But no, I still have, with the Way Radio, I still got to pay for the hosting for a year and the server bill over there, okay? So that's still pending, guys. It's only a little bit of donations or memberships. So contact me at Opperman.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com, get an autographed copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. We also have all different kinds of services on there, like we can monitor your email account and tell you if anybody's spying on your emails, if your computer's hacked and they're reading your emails. Adoption investigations, we can reunite families separated by the adoption process. Asset searches, all kinds of fun stuff over there at emailrevealer.com. Okay. We have with us today Stephen Snyder, and he's the webmaster, blogmaster over here at the visipview.blogspot.com. You can find his work there. And a lot of interesting stuff, kind of stuff that we cover here on the show all the time. Oh, boy. He got a little bit of Manson. He's got the Process Church in here. He's got we're going to be talking today about the Matamoros drug smuggling satanic cult down there on the Mexican border that they found a whole bunch of dead bodies down there back in the 80s, late 80s. But he pretty much covers all the stuff that we talk about here, so he was recommended to me. Mr. Snyder, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Tell us about yourself. Who is Stephen Snyder?
Well, I've been studying this type of stuff for a very long time now. I was kind of brought into it, I suppose, by my dad, who was a big fan of alternative history, so to speak. He was in the Army for several years in the 50s, and it's really a bit of a mystery to the family as to what exactly he was doing there. My mom claimed for a long time that he was in Special Forces, but after going through some of the military transcripts that I've uncovered, relating to him, I think he might have actually been in intelligence. He spent a lot of time stationed at Fort Meade. He was in a listening post in Greenland. So my dad gave me kind of a unique take on a lot of things that play out in the world, and as I got older, I tended to, venture further into these sort of alternative explanations for current events and what have you. It's now, I guess, been close to 10 years or so that I've been doing really intensive studies on this. It's been very time-consuming and expensive at times, but very rewarding in the same hand. And
how old are you?
I'm about to be 35 in, I think, a little less than 2 months.
Okay, still a young man, let me tell you. Okay, 35. And what part of the country do you live in?
Currently, I reside in West by God, Virginia.
Okay.
I was in Florida for a very long time. That's actually kind of behind the name of the website. VISUP is short for Volusia Investigative Society of Unexplained Phenomena. Volusia County is in Florida. I think I was telling you before, we kind of started out as kind of a paranormal-oriented blog, but after a dispute with my partner, we started going into, or at least I started taking it in a direction, more kind of geared towards deep state politics and just kind of strange things like the Matamoros incident and what have you.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a cook.
Oh, very good. I could use you right now. I'm starving. Okay. I wish you were here right this minute, tell you the truth. Okay. So, yeah, the Matamoros Adolfo Constanza, right? What can you tell us about this?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's a very curious series of events, that unfolded in the late 80s. It's actually kind of fitting, I suppose, that we're discussing him today. He was born on November 1st, 1962, so if he were still alive, and there are some theories that he might have survived the rather extensive shootout that unfolded in Mexico to capture him, he would be 55. Costanzo was actually a Cuban-American, which is very interesting. Cubans, of course, were long linked to drug trafficking, kind of beginning in the early 60s, going up through the 1970s, and they still had quite a significant presence in this in Florida in the 1980s, even though the media tended to overshadow them in terms of the Colombians. But anyway, he was the second really kind of significant Cuban-American transplant to Mexico after Alberto Cilia Falcon, I believe, who was a big trafficker there in heroin and cocaine in the 1970s. Costanzo, of course, lived something of a charmed life. He ended up relocating to Mexico in the, I think, mid to early 80s, and he very quickly became involved with some of the celebrities in the Mexico City area, and he also made some interesting contacts. in the Mexican Security Services. One of those was Florentino Ventura, I believe, who was a big member of the state police, who was long reputed to have CIA ties. Another early follower of his cult was Salvador Garcia, who has been linked to individuals affiliated with the Federal Security Division of Mexico, which is sort of or it was, I believe it was dissolved quite a few years ago, but it was kind of a combination of the CIA and the FBI's counterintelligence division. And, that alone obviously leaves some interesting angles open.
Yeah, I'm Cuban myself. My mother and my brothers were born in Cuba, and I'm also the same exact age as him. I was born in 1962 as well, in September, so he's only a couple of months older than me. Not even a couple, but barely a month.
Interesting.
And so, a lot of Cubans, too, have that CIA connection, because of the whole Bay of Pigs and overthrowing them.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
And, of course, there was a lot of speculation that some of the early, Cuban cartels in the 1970s were, recruited heavily from Bay of Pig veterans who, no longer really had the desire to try to mount an assault on Cuba. They found the drug trade to be a lot more lucrative and safer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and probably had protection, too, to get away with it. Now,
well, yes, absolutely. And then, when you get into some of these alternative explanations of Constanzo, of course, there's been a lot of interesting parallels drawn to some of the statements that the infamous Texas serial killer Henry Lee Lucas made after his incarceration in the mid-'80s. Henry claimed that he was part of a cult known as the Hand of Death. One of the ranches he said that the cult controlled was right around the Brownsville, Texas border area where, of course, Matamoros would be across the border. Another one was apparently near Juarez, and, of course, Juarez in, the last probably 10 or 15 years, there's just been, or actually quite longer than that, since the early 90s, there's been just an incredible amount of women that were killed there, in many cases mutilated. Of course, they're now kind of known as the Women of Juarez. But one of the really interesting statements that Henry made was that he had been trained to be a member of this cult near the Florida Everglades. And, of course, the Everglades were a major staging area for the kind of Bay of Pigs stuff, and it continued to be a lot of the Cubans continued to be trained there for several years afterwards. Reportedly, the camps were shut down in the early 60s, but Henry claimed that he was being trained in this area as recently as 1980. So, it definitely kind of, makes you think a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, that here we have Henry Lee Lucas, right, who was pardoned by George Bush.
Yes.
And here we have Costanza. Costanza, they believe he had psychic powers because he had information. He foretold the attempted assassination of former President Ronald Reagan. So if you had that connection if you had some inside info, some gossip, they would maybe some psychic powers instead, Yeah.
Apparently, he got, I believe, essentially the head of the Hernandez cartel, which was a kind of subdivision of the Gulf cartel, and they apparently were so small part because they were obsessed with his alleged psychic powers. They really thought that he could foresee the future.
So describe what went on. How did this ranch down at Matamoros, describe what went on down there?
Well, it was obviously very brutal. I think reportedly there were about 23 bodies found there, which, of course, 23 kind of ties into the enigma of 23 that was kind of pioneered by Robert Anton Wilson in the 1970s that tended to argue that odd events happened with the number 23. But anyway,
right.
The ranch, there were bodies that were found in various states of mutilation. Quite a few of them had been beheaded or had suffered a lot of wounds to the head. The spines had been ripped out of some of the bodies, in some cases the hearts, and there was reportedly, I believe, a cauldron there that some of these organs and what have you had been boiled down in. Constanzo was apparently schooled in Santeria and Palo Miambo, I believe is how it's pronounced, but don't hold me to that. So there was definitely some kind of elements of that, incorporated into it, but there was also, significant murders, for instance, that were committed on Walpurgis Night, which is a big occult holiday, and a lot of European traditions as well. So it seems that he was probably versed in a lot of different schools of kind of occult thought.
Yeah, and I also heard, too, that this group around Costanzo, they were all fans of this movie called Believers with Martin Sheen. Have you ever heard of that connection?
Yes. Actually, I think Believers might have been partly inspired, at least initially, by some of these strange murders. It came out in 1988, I believe, while Costanzo was still active. And it's interesting, too, because it was written by Mark Frost, who later on will become somewhat famous for co-creating Twin Peaks with David Lynch. And Frost has continued to be involved in Twin Peaks. He just co-wrote the, rather excellent revival of the series for Showtime. Definitely, if you've read any of Frost's books related to the Twin Peaks show, he's extremely knowledgeable of conspiracy theories and what have you. So, yeah, you definitely have to wonder if there was some kind of limited hangout or something with that movie. It's definitely one I've kind of come back to a lot and over the years.
Yeah, I've never gotten into the whole Twin Peaks thing. I've never gotten into it. But you hear so many people talk about it. Maybe it is something I should take a look at. I try not to confuse myself with the fictional TV shows and movies. I try and stick to the facts of what I see going on in real life. Let me ask you a personal question about yourself, though, because you say you have an interest in these things. What is your faith in religion and stuff like that, and your political background, your political bend?
Well, as far as politics go, I've pretty much gone the whole spectrum, I think, of things over the course of my life. When I was a teenager, I would say I was definitely a hardline liberal, probably bordering on socialist. In my late teens, early 20s, I was something of a libertarian. In my kind of early to mid-20s, I was a conservative. I went back to being more of a liberal into my late 20s. I would say now at this point in time, if something sounds like it's a good ideal and sounds humane and it can be practically implemented, I'm, okay with it.
And just do no harm, I guess. Right now, what about your faith, your religious faith?
I would say I have an interest in a lot of different faiths. I'm especially drawn to Gnosticism. Recently, I've started to get into a lot of traditional Celtic religion. I'm actually getting married on June 23rd, Midsummer Night's Eve, next year, and that kind of spurred a lot of research into the old Celtic religion, because we were trying to do sort of a Celtic-themed wedding for ourselves.
Well, congratulations on the wedding, okay, and good luck with that. Okay, I got married when I was about your age, and okay. Another interesting movie that just came out more recently is Perdido Durango with what's his name? That guy from The Sopranos is in it, and that girl from Rosie Perez is in it. The guy from Sopranos is Jim Gandolfini. Have you seen that movie?
Okay. No, I have not. I'm not too caught up on movies that have come out recently.
Well, it's about 10 years old. It's about 10 years old.
Okay.
And I got to tell you, man, it's really there's a lot of undercurrent that they know more about what went on down there than they just come right out in the movie. Check it. And Gandolfini's done a couple of these kind of movies about snuff films and being involved in underground activities and stuff. He was seemed to be tuned into something, and definitely Rosie Perez is, man. She's out there. She's
oh yeah
she's into all this kind of so now what about with this because this made major news when this thing turned, because in '89 I was going down to the Mexican border. I was all over this area. As a matter of fact, we were talking to people and saying, hey, what the hell went on down there, because we knew people who were moving marijuana over the border and stuff. That was when the first rumors of the tunnel, the quote unquote the tunnel, the first tunnel. Everyone had heard, the marijuana was coming through this tunnel, but we just couldn't believe it was true. We assumed it was a myth, mythical tunnel. But later on, we found out there really was. Now there's tunnels all over the place. But we found out that there was a tunnel.
All kinds of stuff going through those tunnels, not just drugs, but human beings as well.
Exactly. But now this made the news. It was on the Enquirer all the time, every week. The Post had headlines, of this big giant bloodbath down there. But then suddenly, snap of a finger, boom, it all goes away. What about some of the unreported facts about this case?
Well, like like I said, I think the biggest, kind of unreported fact is the likelihood that this was part of a much broader network, really. I mean, obviously there were hints with this, with some of the revelations made by Henry Lee Lucas. During the same kind of time frame, there was the quote-unquote Texas slave ranch that was uncovered near Kerrville, Texas, and Mountain Home, where you actually had kind of a similar setup to the infamous Colonia Dignidad of Chile, where, people were essentially being kept there as slaves, reportedly by German immigrants in this ranch. There was definitely a lot of evidence that this was part of a broader network. And then when you sort of get into the, I suppose you could say, Mexican deep state, you sort of have these reverberations going back to the Civil War that was kind of fought there at the onset of the 20th century. On the one hand, you had Republican forces, which were quite heavy with Freemasons, that ended up prevailing, and then there was the, I believe it's pronounced the Los Cristos movement that spawned some very interesting organizations in Mexico. One of them was the Legion of Christ, which was sort of, I suppose, the Mexican version of Opus Dei. It was never really that big in the United States, but it was very big in Latin America for many years until the founder was implicated in child molestation, including several of his own children, not very long ago. There was the kind of Mexican branch of the Sinarchist movement, excuse me, which there's a lot of interesting theories about. And then, of course, there was Los Ticos, the Owls, which have kind of their own possible connections to some of these drug cartels in Mexico, specifically the ones in Guadalajara, I believe, the second largest city there, which the cartel there ended up spawning the Juarez and the Salonian and several other major ones, the Tijuana one and what have you. And there were a lot of speculation that the Ticos were related to this cartel. But Los Ticos was founded by a man named Carlos Gallardo, I believe. I'm probably actually totally butchering that, but I'm trying my best. But he was actually a full-blown Nazi collaborator during the Second World War. He spent some time in Nazi Germany. He came back to Mexico after the war ended, and then he set up a university, the Autonomous University of Guadalajara, in the mid-1970s, reportedly with aid from the United States, Agency for International Development, which, of course, has long been suspected of being a CIA front. So, definitely the presence of the Ticos, who were also kind of suspected of being the founders of the White Brigades and who had a lot of ties as well to the Federal Directorate of Security, the Mexican CIA, were very interesting. So, you had kind of this whole network where you have these kind of strange, secret societies and what have you, and then, beneath them you had these drug cartels that had these elements of cultic overtones, especially in the case of Constanzo's outfit. And I definitely think that there's, some compelling leads that this was a much broader network that was interconnected, but unfortunately there's not been a lot of research done on this, at least in English.
Yeah, even there was other ranches nearby, like next door, where they found evidence that this kind of activity was going on as well, and they just discontinued the investigation.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of evidence that, both the Mexican and the American authorities who got involved in it, literally destroyed evidence. Well, of course, the ranch that Constanzo's victims were found in, the Mexican authorities literally burned it to the ground. Destroying all kinds of priceless evidence there.
It's interesting, too, that George Bush Jr., the first foreign dignitary he had visit the White House was Vicente Fox, who's rumored and alleged to be involved in all these kind of drug smuggling activities down there as well. In your research, especially in the mid-'80s, did you come across a group called Figueroa Sota?
What was it again?
It was two guys. One guy was named Figueroa. The other guy was named Sota. But as a group, they were called the Figueroa Sota cartel.
No, that's a new one on me, but it sounds very interesting.
It is interesting because they were very well known at the time. And they got busted, I guess it was the mid-'80s, about 85. They got busted, and they were sent to a Mexican prison. But they were allowed to bring their families with them into the prison. They had telephones, they had TV sets, whatever they wanted. I think they even had a car inside the prison. Like, they basically took their outside life and brought the whole family inside to the prison, their furniture and everything. It was fascinating. But when they were taken down, and they had tractor trailers, they were just driving right through the border patrol, and they had a large, like military-type planes bringing in huge amounts of marijuana. And then it was after they were arrested that then these smaller groups, they would call them rabbits, that would be bringing back and forth over smaller batches of marijuana. Right around 85, which is right before this whole Costanza group came over. So, but you can't find anything on them now. When it was well known back in those days, the Figueroa Sota, where are they now? Because they didn't serve a life sentence. They got out of prison sooner or later. Very interesting to me, at least. Now, I was looking over some of your stuff, too, and you were talking about the hippie mafia bringing over...
Oh, yes, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, yes.
Yeah. Now, I had on the show Richard Stratton, who was pretty much running that whole hash thing up from the Middle East to New York and bring... Anyway, did you come across him in your research?
The name sounds familiar, but I'm drawing a bit of a blank now, but I could definitely see that. Of course, the Brotherhood was one of the first networks to really start bringing hashish in from the Middle East on a very large scale in the late 60s, early 70s, and of course, their financiers, William Mellon Hitchcock and Ronald Stark, are quite interesting characters, to put it mildly.
Yeah, Stratton later on became one of the editors of High Times magazine.
Oh, okay. I think that might be where I know him from.
Yeah, and he's done. He just wrote the book, The Hippie Mafia. He was a part of that with Norman Mailer. He was friends with Norman Mailer, and Norman Mailer came under investigation with this hashish smuggling operation.
That is very interesting. Yeah, I was not aware of Mailer's connection to that.
Well, that's another thing that got silenced until this book just came. Because I remember reading it in my house, reading that Norman Mailer was involved in this hash deal. Because I knew all the guys running that hash, because it was coming through the Yippies. And, I was one of the Yippies in New York City back in the 70s.
Oh, okay.
I get around. So, and it's, I don't know. I look back and I wonder how was all this marijuana, and hash and LSD, how was it all being stored and trafficked, right under, and then these big arrests. I remember Dana Beal had a 200-pound marijuana arrest, and they will the charges just go away,
Well, yeah, that's just kind of par of the course. We were talking earlier about Henry Lee Lucas.
Right.
He was in Texas, in a Texas prison in the 1970s after committing a rather brutal assault, and I think he had killed somebody now, if I remember correctly, and he went before the parole board, and he told them straight up that if they released him, he would kill again. Those were his exact words, more or less, and they let him out anyway. Yeah, they definitely have to wonder about some of the stuff. And then, in the case of Constanzo's mother, she was accused of multiple crimes, over the years in Miami area and what have you, and she never did any kind of extensive amount of a prison sentence for that. So it's definitely some rather inexplicable things happen with that. And then, what were you going to say?
I was going to say Henry Lee Lucas. Is he alive today?
No. He died, I want to say shortly after Bush came to office, of natural causes, actually.
I always find that suspicious, too. All these prison deaths and prison escapes, I always find them very suspicious. There's always seems to be more going on with that.
And then, kind of getting into also the case of, just inexplicable work on law enforcement with the hippie mafia. One of their first real financial backers was William Mellon Hitchcock, who was the scion of the fabulously wealthy Mellon family of Pittsburgh. Andrew Mellon, his, I believe, great-grandfather, had been the Secretary of Treasury during the Hoover administration. A lot of people actually blame him for dragging the country into the Great Depression. But the Mellon family is extremely wealthy and powerful. On par with the Rockefellers and the Morgans and some of the other kind of storied families. But he ended up first, William Mellon Hitchcock, that is to say, as a patron of Timothy Leary. He gave him the Millbrook estate to use, for his kind of psychedelic research in the early 60s. When he kicked Leary to the curb towards the middle of the decade, he ended up becoming the financier for the Brotherhood. And at the same time, Mr. Billy, as he was called, was banking with the Castle Bank and Trust, which was a rather infamous CIA front that was set up by Paul Hellawell. And he used that to get shares in a company known as Resorts International, which opened up the first major casino in the Bahamas on Paradise Island. And Resorts, had ties to the Nixon administration. B.B. Rebozo, Nixon's favorite financier, was very involved in Resorts. So
yeah, I believe Merv Griffin too, right?
Pardon me?
Merv Griffin was involved in Resorts International.
Later on, and that's kind of an interesting story. Resorts continued on, and then in the 1980s or the late 1970s, they were also the organization to open up Atlantic City to gambling. They founded the first casino there. And then in the mid-1980s, after their longtime chairman, James Crosby, had died suddenly, they got a new chairman of the board, a fellow that went by the name of Donald J. Trump. Trump took over Resorts when they were in the midst of trying to build the Taj Mahal, which was a massive drain on the company. And eventually Trump ended up in a kind of bidding war with Merv Griffin for the company. Merv won out and ended up with Resorts, and Trump got to keep the Taj Mahal. But you can kind of look at these, direct links to two American presidents, Richard Nixon and Donald Trump, in an organization that the IRS described as essentially a drug cartel.
Mm.
It's really incredible.
And it's interesting, too, because when you look at the people Trump surrounded himself with, he brought in a lot of those old Nixon guys. Roger Stone, Manafort was Nixon, Roy Cohn was a Nixon guy. And even the guy, Pat Buchanan, wrote a Trump speech. He brought in all the old Nixon guys. Like, what's he thinking?
Yeah. Well, definitely. When you kind of look, though, at the ties that a lot of them had to Resorts and the connections that Trump had with it, you can kind of see the rationale behind this. Of course, even before I knew about the connections with Resorts, I had really thought that Trump had been deeply involved with the mafia because of his dealings in Atlantic City. And that really kind of confirmed it for me. So and I think that's, probably part of the reason why Trump is so unsettling to a lot of members of the establishment now. This isn't a community organizer or a governor of some obscure southern state or, the playboy of a former president. The playboy son of a former president. This is a guy who's probably dealt with hardened killers for years now.
Oh, yeah. Did you look into the whole thing about his helicopter pilot and how he got him a great deal? His sister, the federal judge, excused herself from the case and told everybody that she rode on his helicopters and stuff.
I'm not familiar with what you're talking about off the top of my head. What was it exactly?
His helicopter pilot who ran his the shuttle to take people from Manhattan to Trump to Atlantic City for the casinos there was involved in firsthand large marijuana and cocaine smuggling, and got busted up. Yeah. Oh, you got to look into this, man. It's who does great work on that is I forget his name now. I had him on the show too. You see him all the time. I'm not going to remember. He just wrote a book about Trump too. Just came out. You see him all the time on MSNBC. That's you know what you don't see him too much lately though. That's interesting. Now you also too. Now, we were talking about Trump's connections to Roy Cohn and his connections to organized crime. Stephen K. Johnson, David K. Johnson.
Okay. I think I know who you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. But Trump's connection to organized crime, obviously with Roy Cohn, right? And I know you do some work on the Process Church. Did you come up with any connections between Cohen and the Process?
No, but I could definitely see that because I have seen some evidence that the Process was linked up with some of these far right-wing organizations. Well, of course, in the I believe it was the late 60s or the early 70s, they actually had a meeting with George Lincoln Rockwell, the founder of the American Nazi Party, shortly before he was assassinated in Virginia. And then after the process kind of petered out, they remade themselves essentially into a Christian fundamentalist church that, backed a lot of these conservative causes going into the 80s. And, of course, a lot of the rumors and some of the locations that the process was active in, such as Minot, North Dakota, that was quite a bastion for, some of these far right-wing groups, especially the Posse Comitatus movement. Gordon Kahl had his infamous or legendary shootout with the federal government, depending upon your point of view, in that same area around the same time that the process was, or former members of the process were reputed to be active there. So I could definitely see Kuhn being involved in this.
Well, Cohn, Cohn was a Studio 54 fixture. And so were these guys, Michael Carr and John Carr. And by the way, Berkowitz, when Berkowitz got busted, he had Roy Cohen's phone number in his pocket.
Yeah, that don't surprise me one bit.
Yeah. And when I had Jim Rothstein on the show, he said that because he was a New York City detective who was investigating the Son of Sam cult in the Process Church, he said he suspected that Roy Cohen had 3 little boys buried on his Connecticut farm. That were 3 missing boys that were connected to the process here.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. There's, of course, been a lot of rumors for years that Kuhn was involved in, these kind of pedophile rings and what have you.
Yeah.
In that area, of course, John DeCamp, the Nebraska state senator, famously alleged that in the Franklin cover-up. And of course, that brings into a lot of strange connections, with the Pizzagate scandals and what have you. Of course, a lot of that is focused on the Democrats, but obviously Trump had these connections to Roy Kuhn going back to the 1980s. He was the chairman of Resorts International, and I believe he was also a guest at a few points to Jeffrey, Epstein's Island, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, not only that, too. Yeah, he was on the plane. He's been to the island, but also, too, 2 of the victims, Epstein's victims, worked for Trump. The main litigant in all the lawsuits now, Virginia Roberts, go by Virginia Guffali now, worked at Trump at Mar-a-Lago. She worked for Trump at Mar-a-Lago. So
wow.
And that's where she ran into Ghislaine Maxwell in the Mar-a-Lago folding towels in the ladies' locker room at Mar-a-Lago, and she was 15 years old.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, so that's a serious connection between Trump and Epstein, man. Anybody who overlooks that, I can't see how they do it. This is a good time to take a commercial break. Okay. So we're here with Steven Snyder. He's got this great website with all the kind of stuff we always talk about here. It's called a Weissop. What is this thing? Weissopview.blogspot.com. Okay. And he goes by the name The Recluse. So it's kind of a special occasion that he's coming on the show using his real name. Because trust me, when you talk about this stuff, you meet a lot of people. You don't want them to know your real name. But anyway, we'll be back. You know what I mean? We'll be back with more Steven Snyder after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. Archival, but we also do all the kind of different services for you. I'm not going to remember any of this. I'm sorry. But I actually got a statement from her about what was behind that. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. This portion of the show is brought to you by Subash Technosis, SubashTechnosis.com, or on Facebook, it's Subash Technosis LLC. And if you need any kind of search engine optimization, website design, press releases, they also do digital marketing. Any kind of internet marketing, website design, any that kind of stuff that data entry. Subash Technosis. Now, I've known these guys. I've known Subash for about 13 years now. So if you want a good deal, contact Subash Technosis and tell them you've heard them on the Opperman Report, and that's how you get a good deal. We're here today with Steven Snyder. His website is Weissopview.blogspot.com. That's spelled VISUP view.blogspot.com. Now, Steven, you were saying off the air before we were coming on that you have an appearance coming up with Peter Levenda?
Yes, tentatively scheduled, I believe. I'm still kind of working out the details with Frank Zero on the farm about that, but yes, hopefully. that will materialize in the next month or so. I've also got kind of another interview set up, too, with Ryan Peverly, I believe, of Occultalists. I'm not sure if that's actually how he pronounces it or not, but in which we'll hopefully be discussing the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, so some interesting stuff coming up in that regard.
Yeah, you get into a lot of stuff, huh? Hey, let me ask you a question. What do you make of Peter Levenda and that photograph of him with, because you mentioned Pizzagate, with him and John Podesta?
I mean, it's, obviously it's interesting. I mean, I don't know how, insidious it would necessarily be, because Podesta obviously has a long documented interest in UFOs, of course, and I think that might have been a result of Levenda getting roped into, what is his name, Blink-182 singer Tom DeLonge, I believe, disclosure attempt that's been ongoing for the last 2 years or so. Levenda, of course, was a co-writer with DeLonge in a book that they published, in that regard.
Okay, that's interesting. Hey, because he wrote an explanation saying that, well, if you know the ways of the world and how the world works, you make these kind of meetings and, I don't know. Interesting stuff, though.
Secret Machines, yes.
Yeah.
That was the name of the book, by the way, Secret Machines, yes, that Levenda wrote with DeLonge. But, I mean, I kind of think inevitably, if you're getting into this, UFO type of research, I mean, Podesta would be somebody, you would almost inevitably seek out, because, he has been one of the highest-ranking government officials to really openly discuss the prospect of disclosure.
Yeah, and that other email came out with that woman who was connected to, she's another host on American Freedom Radio. I'm not going to remember any of this. I'm sorry. But I actually got a statement from her about what was behind that whole email and stuff like that. I never really did anything with it, though. It's a written statement. It's nothing that's recorded. Now, one more thing, too. I noticed on your website the West Memphis 3. Now, give us your opinion on that.
Well, it's, obviously it was an interesting case. It was kind of, it's sort of become now, a kind of textbook case of the satanic hysteria that sort of began to emerge in the 1980s and then continued on into the early 90s. Of course, there's a lot of, questions as to whether they were guilty or not. Obviously, the documentaries were made that raised a lot of questions about the thoroughness of the investigation that was done into the killings and what have you. And then, of course, you have sort of the significance of Memphis, which, is obviously was a major ritual city in ancient Egypt. If you go into sort of the Michael Hoffman theories out there with Twilight language and what have you, it certainly had a significant amount of that present in the case.
Well, when I was reading your website, it seemed like you feel it is an occult killing, right?
Yes, I could definitely see that, being a cult killing. It's just, it's kind of a question, though, of, was it actually committed by the kids or was it committed by, somebody that was more knowledgeable of this? Obviously the kids were, metalheads in high school, but speaking as somebody who was also a metalhead in high school, they're not really going to be the types of people that are actually very knowledgeable about occult topics and what have you, beyond what maybe they've seen in some album covers or something like that. I was pretty much always the smartest man in the room when it came to discussing kind of occult-related topics with other metalheads. So, I've always been kind of dubious of that. Having grown up in the subculture, there's definitely a lot of, strange things that go on. I was friends for many years with a singer from a local band in Florida who died recently, and this guy was so into his death metal, he actually dug up a body, took the skull out of it, and created kind of an altar in his house, around the skull. But he didn't know anything, though, about sort of the principles involved in this, though it was kind of interesting to me that he had kind of subconsciously, I suppose, tried to embrace the ancient skull cult kind of principles, if you will.
Okay, so but you must be aware of Eccles' interest in Crowley and memorizing the Crowley alphabet and stuff,
Well, yeah, I would say, there obviously were some people out there, who knew something about this, but, yeah. a lot of, I think, metalheads usually are more interested in getting a rise out of straights, if you will, than, any kind of significance. And that, if anything, I've actually encountered most of these people as being rather militant atheists.
Well, what about today? Would you describe Eccles today as an occultist, a very knowledgeable occultist and black magician?
Quite possibly.
Because, we just had the guy who purchased Damien Eccles' storage locker. Eccles had a storage locker, and there's I believe the number was like 2,000 books on the occult in there. We also had people from the Aleister Crowley Themelites. That Eccles belonged to the Themelite group in prison, and they actually named they named a library after him, and he donated another 2,000 books to them. We have writings.
That is interesting.
Oh, we got a ton of stuff on this. In fact, we're getting the what's that thing called, a thumb drive, with all the material that was in his locker there. We have his own writings and his own handwriting where he says, "I am the devil, not a devil, the devil." Really, really intense stuff, and I would, if you look at him now, his whole body is a sigil, is a walking document to Crowley. So, yeah, I couldn't be more convinced of the occult connection and his expertise in the occult, and his girlfriend Dominique Tier, whose cousin was an expert on vampirism, and actually wrote a magazine. She was the spokesperson for vampirism in Transylvania. Okay,
Okay, that is interesting. And was this the girlfriend that he he had a kid with too?
Yeah.
And remember correctly? Okay.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the kid never. Yeah.
Okay, that is definitely very interesting. Now, was there evidence of this? You're saying they found in his locker from like high school or something like that, or was this after he was incarcerated?
This is after he was set free from prison, after he got out of prison.
Okay.
Yeah, and we also got some information. Now, I guess we'll leave that one up to hanging a bit. Today the guy is definitely considered to be an authority on the occult and looked up to by other occultists, in my estimation. And I've been following that thing since '97. I've been following it on Usenet with all those characters. I was involved with them for years. Hey, you know what? You mentioned Satanic Panic. I got something great for you. This is going to blow your mind. I just got in contact. Remember the McMartin Preschool?
Oh, yeah.
I just got in contact in the last 4 months, with the geologist who went there. He was the first guy to go there with ground-penetrating radar looking for anomalies underneath the ground, underneath the McMartin Preschool. And he came out with a report that said, well, we couldn't find anything. I located him. I interviewed him. He sent me a letter. And what he reports to me now is that he went back there. No one's interviewed him in 40 years since McMartin. No one's interviewed him about this. I'm the only guy. And he went back there after they had raised the property and after they had raised the garage. There was a detached garage that he was told wasn't part of the McMartin Preschool, but after they sold the property, it turned out that it was. And he found underneath the garage a hand-dug room, hand-dug in the sand, and with a hand-dug staircase underneath that garage.
Wow.
Yeah. And the thing is, we can get an official, because the building and grading reports are there, and we can just go get that. We just got to get a title report and go get that. I tell you, man.
No, I'm sure that would certainly be intriguing. Definitely it was, it was an interesting time because, there were obviously a lot of these credible reports coming out of, occult activity really, awash all across North America in a lot of ways in that era, i.e. the 1980s. And, it just seemed like that, when the authorities went to target people, it was usually in much more flimsier cases than some of the ones they could have potentially built.
Or, how much are the authorities involved in this themselves and then purposely sabotaging these cases and throwing them and stuff,
absolutely.
Which brings me to, now, your opinion of the Brotherhood of Love was, you believe they were like a CIA-type operation?
I don't know if most of the actual members of the Brotherhood were, specifically recruited into the CIA. I think that, some of the individuals that were pulling the strings of the Brotherhood, like Ronald Stark and Hitchcock, most surely did have, intelligence connections, though. A lot of these organizations, I think that a lot of the actual rank-and-file members were totally unaware of, what was actually going on. You could probably say the same thing about the Process Church as well. where, I mean, it's really only maybe a handful of people at the upper, hierarchy of the organization that really have some sense of anything that's going on. But I suppose, in a way, you could say it might have been a kind of CIA front, not necessarily, wittingly when it started out, but, it does seem that it was later co-opted for those types of purposes, certainly by the late 60s.
Did you ever look into Tom Prasad from the High Times, the founder of High Times?
I'm somewhat familiar with it, but no, I've never really, researched him extensively.
And what do you make of Timothy Leary? Was he always an agent or just toward the end, become an informant?
Oh, well, Larry obviously, got a lot of support from very early on. It's hard to say. I think Leary may not have been, initially started out as an agent, but I do think from a very early period some people became interested in some of his theories and what have you. It's certainly by at least the early 60s or so. But, the whole thing with, acid is, it's a complex topic. Obviously there was a lot of the, MK Ultra and artichoke experiments where massive amounts of LSD, were tested on prisoners and, military veterans and things of that nature. And then going into the early 60s, you started to see it kind of drift into the general public. And I'm not really sure how exactly the CIA really felt like that, about that. Certainly by 1966, there was a major push to make it illegal, and interestingly, a lot of the acid afterwards started to come from, I believe, Prague, if I remember correctly. So there was probably an element of the KGB also being involved in this. There's some theories that they had started to take over the acid trade to sort of destabilize the United States in the late 1960s. In the case of Ronald Stark, who was the second financier for the Brotherhood after William Hitchcock had dropped out, Stark had a lot of interesting connections to communist groups in Europe, as well as a lot of the kind of neo-fascist ones in Italy specifically.
Wait, what year did you say the KGB took over the LSD trade?
Well, some of the theories think that it might have been around the mid to late 60s. I don't know if I would say specifically that they took it over, but they did, I think, encourage it to a certain extent. And then, of course, the KGB, had its own sort of occult interests as well. They were, at the cutting edge of a lot of the psychic research and what have you that the CIA and the military later got into in this country. There's been a lot of speculation that there might have been, members of sort of the cosmist ideology that had ingrained themselves into the CIA, as well as people that had been influenced by Rosicrucianism and Martinism. So, there's definitely that kind of element.
You mentioned the KGB because when I was with the Yippies, the guy who was the head of the Rainbow family around 1977, 1978, he drove him around on a bus. He had a bus, so he had a bunch of Rainbow family with him. He was getting money from the KGB every month. He said it was for his poetry. They were paying him for his poetry.
Yeah.
I don't even think the guy could read or write, but that's what he said.
Yeah.
A lot of your work is. What do you think of Dave McGowan? You follow his work?
Yeah. I would definitely say Dave McGowan was quite an extensive influence on me. I think McGowan maybe took some of his, research a little too far. I don't know that you could say that the entire counterculture was a creation of the CIA. Really the counterculture that emerged in San Francisco in the early 60s, had been gestating for a very long time, of course, going back to the Beats, and then, even prior to that, prior to the Second World War, there was a large theosophical following on the West Coast in general, and especially in California, which, also had some of the nucleus of that. But certainly, it was heavily co-opted by the late 1960s. There's no doubt of that.
And what about, are you involved in any of the groups on Facebook, like the Dave McGowan group or the Maury Terry group?
No, I don't really do much with Facebook except use it as a messenger service.
Okay, all right. Listen, we got 1 minute left. What do you want to leave us with?
Never really good at these. I think, in the whole, obviously there was a very complex network, I think, that sort of was behind, the Metamoros incident. It wasn't an isolated incident by any stretch of the imagination. And specifically, a lot of it seems to have derived from these sort of, fanatical right-wing groups. And I think that's kind of a perception that a lot of conspiracy researchers are hesitant to go into because they tend to be more critical of liberal political ideology, and I think to some extent are oblivious to this. I think that's especially true when it comes into some of the theories surrounding pedophile rings. Definitely in a lot of my research, I've seen a lot of evidence pointing to groups like the Sovereign Military Order of Malta and Opus Dei as being, very, very high in these types of networks. I mean, like I was just mentioned earlier, a group that sort of grew out of the Los Cristos movement that spawned Los Tecos in Mexico was the Legionaries of Christ, which was, very similar to the Opuscians, and their founder, was disgraced because of his involvement in pedophilia, including with his own children. So certainly with these very radical right-wing and specifically radical Catholic organizations, there's some very, very disturbing connections there.
And is that the future focus of your work is on this pedophile? I guess you call them pedophile rings. I guess but this pedophilia of people in power.
Yes, to some extent. I mean, I'm getting ready to really do an extensive series on the Knights of Malta because they really have a lot of strange connections. To the occult going back for many centuries now. I kind of dubbed them the Men in Black. And it's enough to say that, they're the only instances of Men in Black, but, they do seem to kind of fulfill a similar function that, this kind of storied Men in Black of UFO mythos do, and that they are kind of these suppressors of these, arcane ideologies and what have you, is the Knights really do seem to have consumed a lot of organizations like the Knights Templar and kept some of these, occult philosophies hidden for many years.
Well, if I can get you to come back, you can teach me all about that because I'm definitely, I've heard of Knights of Malta, but I've definitely done no research whatsoever that I would call myself enlightened on it. Stephen Snyder, thank you so much, my friend, okay?
Thank you very much for having me.
Keep in touch, my friend. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Okay, we had Stephen Snyder. His website is VISUP, V-I-S-U-P, view.blogspot.com. If you enjoyed tonight's show, and I know people enjoy this kind of stuff, check out OppermanReport.com. A lot of things we talked about. I have done whole shows on McMartin and West Memphis 3, the occult involvement, all this kind of stuff. We've just done whole entire shows. Dave McGowan, we've had on a guest here several times. But there's more content in the members section. In his documents, his Jeffrey Epstein, 24-page letter. We talked about forming the Clinton Foundation. We're trying to raise some money this week. I know for the listeners, the loyal listeners to the show, I guess last week I made it sound like all the bills were paid. Okay, there's a ton of money in Tiny Pass, but that money doesn't come available for 25 days. And today is the first of the month, and I got all these bills for Awake showing up. We got the Voscast bill just came in today, and I still have not paid the domain. The domain's paid.